Or put on my lipstick. I'll see. Come on over, Chris. Yep. I know you guys should all get a chance to hang out because you're like a cool group here. All right. Yeah, if you can get some pictures, Mike. I haven't even had a chance to take pictures. Oh, if you could take pictures too, Richard, I don't know. Thank you. I forgot to ask. All right. All right. Well, thank you everyone for coming here tonight. We have members of the public here to testify. I want to thank you for joining us this evening as we collect public testimony about the impacts of the government's COVID health policies. For many of us, the government's response to the novel coronavirus didn't make any sense. Things like first do no harm and OSHA standards were completely ignored. Suddenly, we were asked to submit to a litany of experimental procedures in order to keep our jobs, attend school, or get medical care. The mainstream press and government officials downplayed any of the negative consequences that these health measures could possibly have on individuals or society at large. Simple concepts like the need to breathe fresh air were suddenly too political to talk about, as local officials and authorities at every level enforced all the measures that were recommended because we have to do something. In the rush to protect the greater good, oh, a little closer. I don't know if it's even turned on. Oh, there we go. Okay. Could I begin, Annika? Would that be all?
If you're recording this, it might be good.
Yeah, if you don't mind. Oh, okay. Oh, great. Okay, yeah, thank you. Sorry about that. All right. Thank you for joining us this evening as we collect public testimony about the impacts of the government's COVID health policies. For many of us, the government's response to the novel coronavirus didn't make any sense. First, do no harm, and OSHA standards were ignored. Suddenly, we were asked to submit to a litany of experimental procedures in order to keep our jobs, attend school, or get medical care. The mainstream press and government officials downplayed any of the negative consequences that these health measures could have on individuals or society at large. Simple concepts like the need to breathe fresh air were suddenly too political to even talk about, as local officials and authorities at every level enforced all the measures that were recommended because we have to do something. In the rush to protect the greater good, all efforts focused on slowing the natural course of a virus. However, the measures we took to flatten the curve did come with costs. Fear brought out the worst in people. Neighbors were pitted against neighbors and families were torn apart. Those years seemed to go on with no end in sight. But now that we are here, past the emergency phase of this crisis, there is still an urgent need to assess what happened, to conduct a thorough cost-benefit analysis of our response measures. not only to bring healing and begin to remedy the harm that was caused, but because many of the practices which caused so much damage are still in use today. Public officials and administrators are still willing to impose the same measures in the belief that they are harmless and effective. As much as we'd like to leave it behind, the truth has not been integrated into the mainstream narrative. And so therefore, the emergency is still actively impacting us. I am incredibly grateful to the legislators who have invited us into the State House today to share our stories. Until now, there has been no legislative process, no opportunity for public testimony at the state level. This tonight that you guys are witnessing here is the first step towards healing and reconciliation that is so needed so that the next generation, the children who grew up in isolation, fear, and division during the COVID years will understand that that fear and division was not caused by a virus, but by the response measures themselves. And so that they can grow up and choose to promote health and love and community connections in the face of adversity. May the results of this project help guide leaders to make more informed and compassionate decisions in the future. Thank you so much for joining me. And thank you, Orca Media. If we can give them a round of applause for being here tonight. Fantastic. So we have a series of presenters tonight. We have folks who could not present tonight who wanted to, but we are keeping it short for the brevity of people. We do have online testimony that we are gathering, but we have others here tonight who wanted to speak about the government overreaches, about constitutional issues, data gathering, what does the data actually show, other vaccine injuries and economic impacts and things like that. So the folks that we do have here who are going to be presenting are sharing individual stories, and they include a medical provider and a patient, a former legislator and a former state employee, a school board member, a parent and a student, and a couple with experience with vaccine injuries. So let's get started. Thank you, folks. And maybe say your name and your town.
Oh, yeah. Well, my name is Emily Payton, but first what I want to do is I really want to hear a round of applause for this beautiful woman with her brightness, her kindness, and her smile, she does amazing work, and I'm in total awe. And thank you for letting me read this, and I'll be fast. Here are my comments for the record regarding the harms of COVID. I personally saw my old startup business in carbon sequestering hemp building materials fail, which ought to have been of great interest in people, and that my credit fail, despite having worked on building it for years. It was a startup, there was no relief. Left out of family events, I was targeted by hostile Vermonters, and I was censored out of the gubernatorial election process. I recognized all of it for what it was, a pre-planned attack on the rights and peace of the people based on lie after lie after lie. The players who acted out this attack are liable still for their complicity, evidenced by the base hypocrisy to allow mandates of any subcutaneous medical intervention on any part of the Vermont population while absolving themselves from the same, as government did. The actions of those that supported and promoted the falsehoods of COVID, resulting in the greatest transfer of wealth from the middle and lower classes to the elite, harms to the people that are yet and still not faced publicly, trespass of unalienable rights to free and warrantless search, amount to treason and RICO activity on the part of the government, with collaboration with private corporations in the military-industrial complex. We, the people, observed that the entire world could stop on a dime and coordinate the assault on the people, thus ending the facade that current wars are anything organic. Rather, these two are implemented to cause further transfer of power and control of the global community, with complete disregard for the suffering or for the climate, their current excuse and fear mongering for extraction. I am thankful that the network of politicians in service to the deep elite, rather than to the duty of protection of the rights of their people, as is their sworn duty upon collecting pay for their office, have revealed themselves. For there is a mighty comeuppance about, nationally and globally. Merely for violating the Nuremberg Code, they have vacated their claim to lawfully execute their position. So, because their loyalty is to a deep elite whose gatekeeping exists in pedophilia and horrific acts against innocence, their loyalty is of no use to us, the people invested in goodness, collaboration, and healing. We, the people, in a multitude of ways, are removing their might, addressing their plunder, and disbanding their false authority, using lawful tools, and we shall prevail. We shall organize ourselves for the repair of our souls, communities, and lands, and I speak it, and so it shall be. By failing to admit their mistakes and their own harms, these actors describe their full participation with the attack on the global people. The PCR test was fraudulent, never peer-reviewed before use, and post-launch was peer-reviewed as fatally flawed. Additionally, it was delivered at 40 cycles, which would create false positives everywhere, which were used to pump up the fears news cited these falsehoods. The flu was quietly retired, and this bad actor posing as our current governor coerced and guilted our people can run through it, guilted people into doubting their suicide, into doubling their suicide rates, leaving their elders to die alone, and harming the emotional, educational, and psycho-spiritual progress of children, while advancing the whims of the drug cartel, which operates the public schools as factory farms for profit. I'll finish. I want to thank you all for being so collect, because we are now 100% collectively motivated to repair long-standing evils of the deep elitist management of public schools. Thank you.
And now I'd like to invite up to the podium former Representative Vicki Strong from the Northeast Kingdom.
Good evening, everybody. This is my first time back in the State House since having served office. I served here for 6 terms and 12 years. And during that time, I supported many informed consent bills, healthcare freedom bills, pro-life bills, because the rock bottom faith I have is the sovereignty of our bodies and the sanctity of human life. And once we move away from those core issues, those core beliefs, then we open up ourselves to any kind of government whims. My story really begins with the loss of my son, Jesse. Jesse was a Marine and in 2005 gave his life for freedom in Iraq. And that set me on a course of really realizing the cost of our freedoms and how easily they're stripped away bit by bit. And COVID showed us in a big way how easily stripped we can be of our basic human rights. For me personally, I decided not to be vaccinated, and I had to submit a religious exemption, which to me was a violation of my privacy. And because of, I didn't know who saw that religious exemption, anyone in the State House could have known that I was not vaccinated. I was forced to test regularly, which I often skipped or stuck my swab under his thing. But in that course of time, I felt isolated and somewhat persecuted because of my beliefs. Also, my husband was a pastor during that time, and churches were forced to close. And then in silly ways, when we were allowed to open again, you weren't allowed to sing. Does anyone remember that fun little thing? Just go to church and listen to the music, but don't open your mouth and sing. sit many feet apart, wear masks. And finally, our church just said enough, and we just worshiped openly and without regrets. But for me personally, I also lost a job, a part-time job that I had for 25 years, Weight Watchers, which was helping people be healthy and lose weight. And now that support for many people no longer opened up after COVID. So that was a job loss. But I want to talk specifically about, for the next couple minutes, about what happened to me in an ironic way as a supporter of informed consent. During the COVID time, we had traveled, my husband and I, to Texas, came back on an airplane. Everybody's wearing masks, except for when you're drinking, right? Having a ginger ale. So we both came down with COVID, whatever that was, however that's diagnosed. And he ended up with a pretty serious case of pneumonia. I took him to our regular doctor, and they said immediately he needs to go to the hospital. They took him by ambulance. I'm following behind. And as soon as we pull up to that hospital, the staff comes out and said to me personally, had I been vaccinated? And I said no. And had my husband, and they said no. And while he's being carried in on a stretcher, really not even real coherent, they said, would you like to be vaccinated now? And I'm like, what the heck? He's sick. You know, you're going to give him a vaccine now? But in the meantime, they told me I had to stand back and was not allowed in the emergency room or to even step foot in that hospital. And so for the 3 or 4 days he was there, I could only talk to him on the phone, or I drive to St. Johnsbury where he was in the hospital and hold up a sign and he'd look out of the window. I had received one call from a doctor that whole time, was really when he was just admitted, who wasn't really willing to talk to me more than a few minutes. And during those days he was there, he was given remdesivir and a few other drugs that I was vehemently against. They were also experimental and has turned out to be detrimental to long-term health. And now my husband did pass away 2 years ago. I'm not sure how much of that episode related to his illness. He had heart disease, but it certainly didn't help him. So I want to just remind us again, what is it we're willing to stand up for? I stood up for healthcare freedom, and I will continue to do so. And there are many here today who lost jobs, weren't able to go to weddings, funerals, and a long list of things that maybe in some ways we've forgotten the cost to our freedom. So I'm here to represent that cost. I thank you for listening, and I wish us all well in the continued fight for our freedoms.
Thank you so much, Vicki. And next we have up UVM graduate Lauren Palmer from Williston. Thank you for coming here.
Good evening. My name is Lauren Palmer. I'm a local educator and a recent college graduate from the University of Vermont. I'm here to share my reflections on the COVID-19 response as a college student between 2020 and 2023. I'm also the founding author of a student letter signed by over 1,000 students, professors, and concerned citizens about the harms of the COVID-19 response. Before transferring to UVM, I studied at St. Michael's College during the 2020-2021 school year. Despite mask and social distance mandates, I actually loved my time at St. Mike's and found a community of caring peers and professors. All that changed during the vaccine rollout halfway through the year. I did not feel comfortable taking the vaccine and was granted an exemption, but the hope I felt in receiving an exemption was quickly crushed. Special regulations for unvaccinated students required me to test and mask, even when these requirements were dropped for vaccinated individuals. My vaccine status was disclosed to the supervisor of my summer job without my consent, so that he ensured I was regulation compliant. I was later denied opportunities for summer housing and social activities. Other students I knew around the country lost hard-earned scholarships, hospital visits with loved ones, medical autonomy and privacy, internships, relationships with peers and professors, and their place as students at their chosen school. Most of these mandates were illogical, including requirements to get vaccinated, even for solely online classes. Worst of all for me was the quiet withdrawal of those around me. and how quickly those I had trusted turned away. I wrote a number of letters to the administration at St. Mike's and received nothing but a thank you for your communication email in return. The school simply turned away in silence and without discussion. I had to deal with that loss of trust for years after, often suffering PTSD-like symptoms during my time at UVM and beyond. I would get dizzy and found it hard to breathe under bright classroom lighting or when in rooms or hallways reminiscent of St. Mike's. I did not feel safe in crowds. Cramped spaces felt like being back in a mask 24/7, hidden and unable to escape. I think it's easy to say that all that is behind us now, but it isn't just about COVID anymore. COVID was only the manifestation of a greater sickness plaguing our time. Namely, it revealed the failing state of our rights and our humanity, those two things which exist most importantly for times of hardship. Because if in times of hardship our rights and humanity fail, it is not because they miraculously gave way. It is because the strength we thought they had did not exist to begin with. If our right to freedom had been strong during COVID, we would not have been threatened into lockdowns and masks. If our humanity had been strong, the majority would not have been led to believe that it is okay to view and treat any part of its neighbors as less than human, even for the good of the many. One of the most powerful moments in my college experience was during a class on modern Chinese history at UVM. While we were discussing the Cultural Revolution, my professor displayed a black and white image of a teacher who had been arrested by his students for being a, quote, capitalist intellectual. They had thrown him up on a wooden pedestal and forced a paper cone hat on his head, which proclaimed his crimes. He was in the middle of the picture on his knees with his head down, wearing his cone hat, and his students surrounded him, cursing and preparing to beat him. My own professor asked the class as we looked at the picture, would you have followed the crowd or would you have been able to resist? Without fail, everyone in my class agreed that they would have recognized how terrible it was and resisted. And yet during COVID, most of them had complied willingly with forced mandates, celebrated policies restricting their rights and the rights of others, and participated, whether publicly or privately, in condemning the unvaccinated. The worst and most heartbreaking part was that my classmates' response was the same as what Chinese students involved in the revolution said in interviews years later. They didn't realize what they were doing. So if the years of COVID-19 and events like COVID should teach us anything, it's that our humanity only remains strong as long as we as individuals first can see clearly. And seeing clearly requires us to walk with a posture of surrender and compassion, even in our fears and especially in our convictions. The worst events in history have happened because good people were led to believe that it is okay to treat and view some of its neighbors as less than human for the good of the many. And unless we catch ourselves in this act and not after, we too will be caught up in the fervor of our times. As technology continues to separate us from reality, as social media deprives us of true community, as AI tests what it is that makes us human, I hope these lessons of COVID-19 become a warning and a beacon. If we do not have the courage to sit with discomfort, to accept pain, to walk with surrender, to suffer difficulties, to imagine, and to think, both critically and unflinchingly, then we have lost our ability to be human. And if we do not fundamentally and profoundly treat each other with respect and with love, no matter the situation, however dire or uncomfortable, we are no longer human. Thank you.
Thank you. And next up, we have Tom and Linda Livingston from West Thompson.
As Amy has said, pardon me, we are from West Thompson, and our journey in all of this is actually started for us in March of 2021. That was when I got my first shot. Better? And to reiterate, I was given my first shot in March of 2021 with little or no side effects. In the following month, got the second shot. And 3 days later, it was excruciating exhaustion. Absolute, next to useless. And this whole thing was followed another couple of days by excruciating headaches and body aches everywhere. So I bared with it and kind of got through it. And then after about 3 weeks, it was time for, I said, well, we got to do something. And we called the doctor's office. And the doctor's office says, well, yes, we've been hearing the exact same thing that you're talking about, different symptoms, but people calling us and looking for advice. And they said, there really isn't anything you can do, and it'll go away. So, okay, again, as everyone has mentioned here, this is all new, and we really weren't sure what was going on. And this whole episode, it would last a week and a half, and then a couple of days later, it would die down and then come back. So it was a reoccurring cycle of events. That went on for another few weeks. I called the doctor's office again. And he said, yes, same thing. People are calling, and they kind of let the cat out of the bag. They said that more and more people are calling with problems. There still isn't anything that we can do for you, and it will go away. So it was a light bulb time for me. Something here is not right. Linda, fortunately, was doing research on a number of sites to see if there was a COVID protocol. And she found a few sites, and one of them was with ivermectin. At that time, you couldn't get ivermectin, and the doctors wouldn't prescribe it. So we got a protocol that was all natural, and we were able to get the necessary ingredients to do that. But this whole thing lasted, we were into May, the end of May. And I could barely function. So we started with the protocol, and within about 3 or 4 days, it was, I won't say miraculous, but it was definitely a lot better. And one of the things that has really impacted on us, and me particularly, is that I've lost all faith and confidence in the medical community. Haven't been to a doctor in a number of years. That'll kind of lead into what Linda has to say about the more personal side of what has happened here.
So what Tom didn't share was it took a full year and a half before he started to feel human again. And it was a battle. It was waves. He'd be okay, and then he'd be worse. And we just cycled in and out of the vitamin protocols that we were on. But he eventually got better. Yes, thank God. Because there's so many people that have lost so much. They've lost the ability to have a full life. They've lost family members. So it was tough, but we were blessed that we were able to find a solution. I didn't take the shots. I'd heard and been reading about different side effects, and I'd had Bell's palsy probably 7 or 8 years before COVID. And that was one of the major side effects. I did not want to go through that again. I said, I'd rather have COVID flu, which I believe I had already had way back in February of 2020. The other effects that we suffered personally beyond Tom's response to the vaccines is family division. We had a wedding that actually had to be postponed. It was scheduled for the summer of 2020, and it was postponed until the next summer, 21. Because I didn't have the shots, my son was worried. He didn't want me to come because there were going to be 100 people there, and he was afraid I would get sick. And basically he told me, well, everybody there's had the shots. And I'm like, well, how can that affect me then? If they're protected, if these shots protect people, then why are you worried about me? We did the wedding. The other, and I'll make it quick because I know we're running out of time. The other issue was my other son had their first baby last July. And sorry, I was not allowed to see her until she was almost 4 months old because I hadn't had shots. I hadn't had the COVID shots. When I finally was able to see her, I couldn't hold her, couldn't kiss her. I couldn't act like a grandmother. And I've seen her twice for a few hours. That was September and then Christmas. And now I'm just completely banned because of my beliefs. And my son is heartbroken over it, and they're in counseling. And it's the separation and the division from what this has done, not just to core families, but to friends. We've lost friends. We had a close friend that had the shots and the boosters. He was healthy. He was 88, but he rode bicycles every day. He was super healthy. I had all his mental facilities, and he went in for a doctor's appointment. He had cancer, stage 4. 4 months later, he was dead. So what it has done to us is just, I can't even, that's all I have to say. We need to heal the divisions. We need to tell the truth, but we need to not isolate our loved ones and our friends at the same time. That's it.
Yes, thank you. Oh, yes, thank you. I'll share that. Yes. All right, and next up, we have former state attorney Tom Kelly from Barry. Thank you, Tom.
So I was reminded by what a couple of you said. How could I forget this? My daughter's wedding in Colorado was postponed. I think it was scheduled for 2020, and she had a private ceremony later. We did not witness that event, that blessed event. I want to thank Amy and the legislature for letting us do this. In November 2021, I was a Vermont prosecutor at that time for 34 years, serving in Lamoille County as a deputy state's attorney. When I was fired for refusing to wear a face mask and refusing to be tested periodically for COVID. And why did that happen? Because I failed to attest, meaning swear, that I had received the COVID vaccination, because actually I didn't take the vaccination. And here's a brief summary of putting that in context. In early 2020, I'm sure everyone remembers, I saw scenes from China and New York City, people collapsing in the street, body bags piling up, stories of people dying on respirators. That was scary stuff. And for about 5 minutes, anyway. And then I contracted COVID-19 with my entire household in early March 2020. Sneezing, chills, low fever. We were all bedridden for the weekend, and I couldn't stop sneezing. The symptoms that I had were described in the media by public health officials. My health history at the time was excellent. Actually, it still is, if I may say. I did not require medical intervention. The good news, immunity. That was my conclusion. I learned it was easy to catch this thing, but it turned out to be a mild illness, as it was for the vast majority of people. Less than 0.5% got seriously ill. I don't know. But we heard talk of vaccines almost immediately, and that was going to be how we get out of this thing. I gotta say, I scratched my head. And that I heard that in church. That was the first time I heard it. The bishop says we're going to be able to get out of this with a vaccine. Huh? I don't have time to get into all the information about my religious objections related to the development of the vaccine on the cells of aborted fetuses and the dangers of the experimental vaccine, which I figured I did not need because I had contracted the disease. Then came the 15 days to stop the spread and mask mandates. As we all know, there was some pushback from some respected sources. Something called the Great Barrington Declaration urged a policy to protect the vulnerable and let others live their lives. Quote from the Barrington Declaration: as immunity builds in the population, the risk of infection is stable, and that this is assisted by, but not dependent upon, a vaccine. Our goal should therefore be to minimize mortality and social harm until we reach herd immunity. Regarding the use of masks, Yale epidemiologist Dr. Harvey Rich infamously said, trying to block the COVID virus with a surgical mask is quite literally like trying to keep mosquitoes out of your backyard by erecting a chain link fence. An exhaustive study of masks, maybe some of you have seen this, a meta-analysis, I didn't know what that was until I looked it up, which is a study of studies, some 170 studies, I believe, was eventually published, which concluded the masks are not effective. Now, I must add, that was poo-pooed, that was attacked, and the public health authorities said it wasn't accurate. But they said what we need is further testing to see if the masks work, despite all this test that viruses go through the mask. Anyway, in my book, the person telling me to wear a mask has the burden of proving that I need to wear a mask. Anyway, so regarding the testing, I had observed that Vermont policy seemed to be driven by case counts, not necessarily by deaths attributable to COVID. When I was fired in late 2021, that was, 18 months or more after I contracted the virus and got immunity. When I was fired in late 2021, officials officially attributed to COVID were about 400. Now, I got to tell you, to this day, then, now, I'm not shocked by 400 being dead. It's sad, every one of them, but 400 in a state with 660,000 people. And then, of course, as someone alluded to, the flu deaths seem to disappear. And you know, we all know the stories about someone killed in a car accident, they had COVID, they died, you know. Further, there were also questions about the testing protocol. And this is my point about the numbers. I don't have time to go into the details, but eventually I had an email exchange with the Vermont Department of Health about this so-called PCR test and the underlying test standard that was alluded to by our first speaker. I provided information was suggested, and I think the source of the information was a guy named Fauci and somebody else, that the test could be producing false positives. The department refused to provide the information I requested and then ironically explained that they were too busy to continue the back and forth with me about the testing protocol because of the increased case counts. Think about that. They're too busy with the case counts that I thought were being falsely inflated. I can provide a copy of that email exchange. I have it here with me. In summary, from my perspective, I was fired for refusing to wear an ineffective face mask and refusing to be tested, whether I was sick or not, with a suspect test, all to protect people who had submitted to a dangerous and obviously ineffective vaccine. One thing I think I learned, I must take charge of my own health and the health of my family. The government should not interfere with my ability to do so. It was not the way I thought my government service career might end, but if you permit me, I would like to close with a quote from a man who lived here in Vermont for some 20 years, Alexander Solzhenitsyn. He said, "You can resolve to live your life with integrity. Let your credo be this: let the lie come into the world, let it even triumph, but not through me."
Thank you, Tom. And next up, we have retired career firefighter, paramedic, Jason Neal from Warren. Thank you, Jason, and his son.
Just stand there. Just like that. Thanks, please. Thank you. Thank you for having me here. Amy, I feel this is a pleasure for me to share my story and a privilege. So thank you. It's a little disappointing that we don't have more of the legislature, but it's certainly understandable given the day that they've had. So thank you for coming down. It sounds like it. It sounds like it. So yes, I am a retired firefighter, paramedic, career firefighter. I'm still a volunteer firefighter in my community, which I'm very proud to represent. My story revolves around the fact of me leaving the career that I loved, my passion, my career that I fought for, that I went to school for, that I learned, that I got the bumps and bruises for, that I realized that I would put my life on the line to save anyone in this room. That's what firefighters do. That's what first responders do. But my story came to an abrupt end after 15 years career, and I had prior years as a volunteer firefighter before that. And in the time of the pandemic, I was on a first due ambulance in the greater Chittenden County. And to be honest, it was scary. It scared the hell out of me every day to go to work, and not to fight the fires, and not to go in to all the other car accidents we go to, and not to deal with the heart attacks. And as Emily said, the suicides, because who dealt with the suicides? The firefighters did. The EMS did. We were the ones. And in the same time, we were being given policies that were drafted and by our administration within the firehouse. And I do believe they were doing the best they could with what they had. They were trying to protect us, the frontline workers. And I have compassion for that, because I wouldn't have wanted to be the chief of a firehouse during COVID. That's not where I wanted to be. I wanted to be on the front line. I wanted to be the one going in there. But our protocols, statewide EMS protocols, are very detailed. So we had to maintain those protocols. And every day our policies were changing, every single day. So I was scared. I was scared to go to work, to maintain my job so I wouldn't get fired, so I could feed my family, so I could still provide for the community and show up and fight the fires. And now have to deal with this scary COVID-19 virus that was going around that was going to kill everybody, as far as what we were told. So the disappointing thing that I see in retrospect is that at the time, I chose not to vaccinate. We chose not to vaccinate. My wife and I, we thought long and hard about it. We chose not to, and we stand by the decision. We believe that was the right choice for us, but I'm not going to tell anyone else what to do. And for me, that is the basis of what we should be doing. You know, don't tell me what to do with my body. Right? So one of the policies that we particularly had within the firehouse was that if an individual was not vaccinated and they were to be in the firehouse, well, you had to wear a mask. Okay. But if another individual was vaccinated, they didn't have to wear a mask. And in the same setting, 3 times a day as a career firefighter, we sit down at a table 2 feet away from each other and share a meal, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So then I can take the mask off and we can laugh and joke and discuss the calls we went on, discuss the suicides, discuss the funny things that happen, make those jokes. No. People are making the policies without even the basic concept of gene theory. As you mentioned, that the surgical mask will not protect most viruses. So as a healthcare provider on the front lines, I scoffed about it, but I was worried for my family. I had to show up every day to that, and my partners did. And we showed up and we were proud to do it at the time. We were glad we were there helping our community, and we always will be. That's why people get into the emergency service. In my last day at the firehouse, I was washing the dishes, and one of the higher ups comes up and says, "Jason, where's your mask?" Washing the dishes because I'm trying to catch up on the day. I said, "Sir, I'm not wearing one." He says, "Are you objecting to me?" I said, "No, sir, I'm objecting to the policy." He said, "Well, then you have to go." My career came to a dead stop in that day as a career firefighter, and that was hard. And it's taken me years to unpack that, to go back to those wounds, and to realize, do I want to still help my community? Do I still want to use my skills to help my neighbor? Even the people that were calling me this terrible thing, "You're unvaccinated, you're hurting people." No, I don't believe I was, but I'm still showing up. And that's what firefighters did. And a lot of the policies, I truly believe, were fear-driven. It's a human nature to fear. That's a good thing. That's why we don't stand too close to the edge. That's why we don't go running out into traffic. We fear. That's good. We should fear. But human nature also is to fear when we don't understand. We didn't understand what was going on. A lot of people were misinformed. And because of that, they feared. Of course they feared to life. We all fear for our lives. That's human. That's what we do. That's what protects us. But unfortunately, it got manipulated to the point that we all saw. And it came down to policy. And someone else spoke about the religious exemptions we would have to check the box on to satisfy whomever it is that we won't get vaccinated. That's still happening. We still have to do that. My daughter has to do that still to attend school. Sorry, but that's bullshit. You know, it's my choice, it's my autonomy. That's our choice as citizens, as parents, as anybody in this country. And the other thing, Amy, you had mentioned do no harm. Do no harm, yes, that's an oath we as healthcare providers take. Do no harm. That's the basis of it. Well, did we do harm? I think that's part of what we're here for, is to talk about. But along those lines of do no harm is, I assume nobody in here has fought a significant fire. Or maybe you have, doesn't matter. Would you put gasoline on fire to put it out? No, of course not. Of course not, because you don't have to do that. So do no harm, I mean, at the basic level. Right? So one of the things I'd also like to mention is Chief Doug Brent, a wonderful fire chief. He's been a fire chief in many communities throughout this state. Bellows Falls, Springfield, Barry, South Burlington. I had the privilege of working for Doug. I'm gonna wrap it up real quick. And what I think we need to do is not critique the past. Because in a fire, after we have a big fire, a big incident, we used to call it, we're gonna have a fire critique. What Chief Brent said is, we don't call it a critique anymore. We call it a post-incident review, because critique is based in criticism. We shouldn't look to point fingers. What we do now in the post-incident review is we say, what did we do well? What can we do better next time? That's what I would say. Because for me, I don't represent the left, I don't represent the right. I represent the truth. I want to know the truth.
Thank you. I understand.
Thank you. Next, we have school board member, parent Jason Monaco.
Hello, everybody. My name is Jason Monaco. I'm a parent, I'm also on a couple school boards. I'm not here to represent the school boards. That's clear. Could be a potential conflict or something. I think one of the main reasons I probably got on the school board was because of the COVID stuff that was going on. Actually, one of the first protests that I've ever gone to in my whole life was in front of the Cabot School. Amy was out there with like 4 or 5 of us protesting the masks that the kids had to go and wear when they went to school, which didn't make any sense to me at all, because I'm a carpenter. I've done a fair amount of sheetrocking, seen sheetrock dust, and they were saying make your own masks and you wear these cloth masks. And I was like, well, if I ever wore one of those when I was staying in sheetrock, I'd end up with a nose full of dust, white dust. I said, well, that doesn't make sense. How is that supposed to keep out the virus? So that was one of my main triggers there. This doesn't make sense. And some of the other stuff, you know, just thinking back, kids had to wear masks when they were outside playing soccer, in a basketball gym playing basketball. I got like, since I didn't really believe it all, and I guess I get a little feisty and told what to do. I would go and I'd take the kids' masks and I'd take some tiny little cutting scissors, I'd cut all the inside layers out of all the masks, so that when they went to school, they had the bare minimum on their faces so that they could breathe. It was pretty funny. I even did it with like the surgical mask. You could totally see my whole face. And I had my son wear that to school. Oh, you can't wear that mask. That one doesn't work well. Which ones do? This is his response. They didn't like that. You know, that's pretty much all I really, you know, everybody has already said most of the stuff. The one thing that just came up recently was in the supervisory union level. There was a policy recommendation from the Vermont School Board Association. And it's just, I haven't really looked at it yet, I haven't had time. But the first couple things in the policy were talking about social distancing in schools and wearing masks in schools. And so I put it to Amy's attention and we're thinking about that right now. But the supervisory union actually adopted that policy, supervisory union. This stuff is still happening. They're still talking about it, which is ridiculous. It doesn't make any sense. I don't know, I didn't write a lot. Anybody has any questions or anything? I'll field some of those.
Didn't they say that children really didn't get sick from COVID anyway, and there was no fatalities, or even they didn't get it in a bad way? I mean, and yet they're still making children do all that stuff.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense. Yeah. One of the things, you know, if you believe masks work and you want to wear a mask because you believe it protects you, go right ahead. I'm fine with that. Even if you're outside or in your car by yourself. I'm okay with that. I think it's enjoyable. But yeah, that was one of the things is like, I'm one with the rest of you. I think I had COVID before they even said COVID was out there. You know, my family had already been sick and this and that. And like, I think we already had it. Isn't there some kind of natural immunity thing? And I wasn't super paying attention to what was going on. I got scared. I did what the rest of us were doing, because I didn't have any access to like real news, real factual information that I could trust. So I went along with a bunch of this stuff, which was, in retrospect, I will not do that again. That's it.
Thank you.
Yes, if anybody's curious, that was policy F27 that just passed our supervisory union last week. It's coming to our school board in another month or two.
I will vote no.
And it can be in response to any disease, not just COVID. So any disease, it can be masks, vaccines, isolation, testing, distancing even. Yeah. So I was really, really glad that we were having this event tonight because we're right on the point. And next we have a legislative candidate and parent, Elizabeth Brown from Waterbury. Thank you.
That would be Tom's candidate for 2 years.
Yes.
Run again.
Please.
It's a
yeah.
lot of fun to run. That doesn't mean that I'm not a behind the scenes. All right. Thanks, Amy. Thanks, all. It's when Amy asked me to testify, it was hard to present a lot of this. I think for many of us, having to go down and to hear these stories is quite painful. And I know, and I'll get into this in a moment, for my family, reflecting on the time. It's pretty traumatic. And I thought we were through this until I started seeing what disagreements were passing around in the school board in terms of this policy that's upcoming. And I still have 2 children that are in schools, and we have the data, we know better, and the fact that they're adopting these policies and this is happening now, we need to stop them.
Yes.
I have 2 children. Lockdown March 2020 happened when my son was in 6th grade and my daughter was in 2nd. Just before this, I started working with the school to get my son tested for learning disabilities. 9 months later, delayed due to COVID, he was diagnosed with dyslexia. It was imperative that he be in school receiving the support outlined in his IEP. However, because he was not vaccinated, if anyone in his class, on the bus, anyone he came in contact with, symptomatic or not, he would be sent home for 2 weeks every single time he was around anyone, and he would have to test to come back. His vaccinated peers did not have to do this and could remain in school, putting the family in an impossible situation. Masking was mandatory. This is kind of funny. My son and his friends, they were in grade 5 in middle school, just sort of, playing with the teachers and the administration, but they figured out if they brought back popcorn to school, they could breathe. So all of a sudden, I was buying mass amounts of microwave popcorn because they could sit there and they would very slowly eat. And they were also very well hydrated. These are kids who never drank water, but between sipping their little straw and eating popcorn, they figured out they could breathe throughout the time. All you have to do is look at Vermont's education performance overlaid by Vermont's approaches to the pandemic versus other states. Our schools, our teachers became enforcers of health mitigations rather than teaching. It was more critical to enforce distancing and masking, both mitigants we now know don't work and cause more harm than good. The company I worked for at the time, TIAA, a global financial services organization, instituted a vaccine requirement for all employees. If you did not comply, you lost your job. We were required to upload our vaccine cards, and we were told they would check the lot numbers to validate. I have peers in other states whose jobs ultimately were protected by their state government and chose not to comply. They did not lose their jobs. But I lived in Vermont and did not have that protection. I watched colleagues get locked out, and I knew Vermont was not going to have like that. We were not in a position at that time for me to walk away from my career for 17 years. My husband had been furloughed during this time, and we were building a home. My family and the financial risk, it was too much, and at the last minute, I folded and vaccinated through coercive measures. Back to my son. This is hard to admit. I don't even think I admitted this to you, Amy, until I wrote this. My husband and I were adamant that our children would not be vaccinated for COVID. Despite my husband's opposition, I was so scared for my son's future, his education, to be clear, that I took him to be vaccinated. He's an intelligent young man, but was not and is still not in a position where he can miss large amounts of school time. I feared he'd be held back, or worse. No, he was not forced to vaccinate, but if he wanted a public education, that was what we were told. Our family was under the guidance of our primary care physician at the time, our naturopath. We weighed the pros and cons, and as the data continued to come in showing the vaccines did not work to prevent transmission of the virus, or worse, could cause harm, we were certain this was not the path for us. Yet our workplace and our schools forced this on us. I have to live with the fact that that vaccine may cause harm to my son. We increasingly know and see that in young men, they are susceptible to cardiac issues from the vaccine. Vermont is the fastest shrinking state in the nation right now per capita. We desperately need working families to move here. There are measures being pressed in our schools, supervisory unions right now that codify the ability to implement these practices despite the evidence. I ask, where is this coming from? According to the CDC, 48% of children have not been vaccinated against COVID. 48%. Back in 2021, 40% of parents were against mask mandates. Social distancing, we know the 6-foot rule is made up. If we continue down this road, you might as well put up a sign at the Vermont border telling 40% of potential families to turn around. They're not welcome here. How is it that our state that is so adamant about body autonomy has no concerns forcing injections and masking by taking away worker, student, and citizen rights? Take that number back, 40%. You want working families, 40% are not welcome in our state. We're not going to grow. Thank you. And thank you for
Yes.
I think I probably have some candidates.
Yeah, and I just, a side note, I was speaking with some the dental association folks who were just in the card room about a week ago here at the State House. And one of them did confirm what I heard during COVID, that this mask mouth was an issue because of dental cavities and bleeding and all sorts of gum bleeding and all sorts of problems. But maybe it was the popcorn, Elizabeth. I didn't think of that. Maybe it wasn't the mask. So, we do need to do the research to find out what was really going on. Thought I had a little levity here. And our last and final speaker, and then I'm going to turn it over to you guys if you want to say a word, and then if you have any follow-up comments or questions. But we have business owner and patient with some concerns to bring evidence that this is still going on. Chris Pratt from Bridgewater. Thank you, Chris.
I was going to go through a litany, Mr. Burton, but everyone said it all about 10 times, so I won't waste everybody's time going through the same crap that we know it doesn't work and doesn't seem to change. The gentleman who talked about socialism, it gives me hope, and I think, I don't know how many of you are familiar with quantum, but in the quantum world, with the new physics theory, your consciousness is going to become the fabric of life. Not money, not power, not the things that have been ruling us. Unfortunately, they're still in charge. They still own everything. This new philosophy of being responsible for who you are and what you become and taking responsibility for yourself in this new world is the new consciousness. But it's going to take time. In the interim, we got all this crap going on of people trying to cope with these crazy laws and these crazy things. Because the people with money don't want to let it go. They don't want to be the most moral, the most honest, the most trustworthy person. They want to be the richest. And that dichotomy is where we're all stuck. And Solzhenitsyn, who said, ultimately, we just need to be responsible for who we are. We need to take responsibility. not with our congressman, not with our somebody else. We need to make decisions for what we believe, and that will become the future. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot to talk about my.
Yeah, yes, thank you.
When we're talking about Helen, I recently was in the hospital diagnosed with. And, he asked me to take a swab, the COVID swab, and I said, no. And he argued with me several hours. And I stood my ground, I said, I think that's fraud, and I'm not going to subject myself. I still have problems thinking that I don't have the fever and I don't have the cough, somehow I can still. Remember when that came out? Asymptomatic. So, but anyhow, he finally honored my thing, but I was placed in isolation. So, and I got along really well with everybody that came, so well that I was discharged the next day. He didn't want me around being an anti-COVID person and influencing the medical staff. So I was in the hospital with pneumonia 4 days. Now, unfortunately, I got that on my own. And I was very cognizant of taking care of myself, which I think helped. But we're not out of the woods. And, everybody's saying COVID's still around, these protocols are still around. I mean, hospitals are probably the worst places to go. They enforce masking, they enforce all of these ancient, barbaric COVID procedures. You can't visit your dying parent. I mean, those things happen. We need to start remembering, looking in the mirror and deciding who we are and what we believe. Not putting our faith in ourselves.
So thank you, all of our participants. We've had quite a range, of perspectives, a range of histories, political points of view, worldviews. But we all share that freedom to say, what happened to us. It's just our truth. And that's what we stand for here. Would you guys like to come up and say a few words? I would love that. Thank you for coming so much. So sponsors of our
First, thank you all for coming here tonight. And I apologize for being late. It was a long day on the floor. I understand what was good. Let me start with, I was lucky during COVID. I was working in a mine in Ludlow. Was a maintainer, working on the equipment there, on the milling machines. And when the mask mandate came out, little background, I was dealing with PTSD really badly at the time. I purposely moved from Bellows Falls to Cavendish so that my ride was only 9 miles instead of 21. That's how bad things were for me. I didn't watch the news. I didn't pay attention to social media. I had no clue COVID was actually happening. So they started talking about it at work. And the mask mandates came out, and my employer fortunately used some common sense and agreed that, well, a dust mask, when I work around equipment that is intentionally built to make 2 micron or less material, and your face is full of, your nose is full of dust, your mustache is covered, even in the best fitting masks. Like, well, this doesn't keep this out. But anybody that wants to wear one, go for it. And that's how they dealt with it at work. If you wanted a COVID vaccine, you got one. I fought getting a COVID vaccine for a long time until I wanted to go visit my children in Germany. In order to fly, I had to have that card. So I made the choice to bite the bullet, get the shot. And the week after I got the shot, got the shot, had my flight planned, Germany closed it. and I could not go see my children. So I spent another 2 years not seeing my children. The woman I lived with, love of my life, they kept me on the straight and narrow, so dealing with my PTSD, you can imagine what she put up with. Kept me from falling into the bottom of a bottle. She didn't get the shot. She didn't want it. She asked me, do I have to have it? I said, no, I don't. You do you. And because I had to go to work and she didn't, I could stop at the grocery store. And I was blown away by, I had to put a mask on to go grocery shopping. 6 feet away from me. People having I didn't know what social distancing was. And if you can imagine, and this is kind of funny, it actually worked out well for me. Because prior to that, I would take 2 weeks to go grocery shopping because I had to build up the courage to be in a crowd. And then when I got in the stores and if people are standing right, line up, and I'd ask somebody nicely, hey, could you please back up? And I'd get I'm just standing here, I'm not bothering you. And then COVID hit. And I had to deal with it. And I had somebody to please back up and they go, I'm sorry. It's amazing. It probably helped me recover a little bit. But seriously, I think masking our children, we could see how horrible it was. My friends at work, we know how hard it was for adults who could already enunciate, who could speak well. How hard it was for us to understand each other when we were doing something dangerous, when we were trying to work and couldn't hear each other well. Wearing a mask, because there were times you had to put a mask on. It's just too much sense. But for children who are learning how to speak, they can't see the lips move, they can't see the tongue move, they can't see how it interacts with their teeth. It was horrible, and we're still feeling the effects today. We in the legislature, I wasn't here then, but in this building and from the federal government, we did so much harm to our children that it's taken years to help them. And it hurts me to know that we as a country, as a nation, cause so much trouble for our children now. Keeping them at home, out of schools. They didn't get to socialize in the most informative years of their life. And we ended up with 7 and 8-year-olds learning how to interact with individuals that they should have learned how to do that when they were 3 or 4. 2, 3, 4. So, yeah, I appreciate you all being here. I appreciate you sharing your stories. I'm sorry for those that lost their jobs, that we didn't, because you stood your ground. If I had to make a choice between standing my ground and losing my job, I'd love my job. I'd have held on to not taking the shot, but I was desperate to go see my children who live here in the States. A whole other story. So, no, thank you all for speaking up. Thank you all for making sure that we don't ever do this to our children again.
Can you remind us of who you are?
Here for me. Oh, me, D.L. Coffin from Cavendish. I represent Windsor District 2, which is Cavendish, Weathersfield, and Baltimore.
Thank you so much.
Hello, my name is Rob North, representative for the Virginians area, northwestern Addison County. I live in Harrisburg and I represent Virginians, Harrisburg, Canton, Addison, Waltham, and New Haven, northwestern corner of Addison County. But I don't want to talk about me, I want to talk about you all. I'm so proud of you all. You all who stood up to the teeth and the claws of fear. I mean, that's what you were facing. And you stood on your principles, knowing what was right for you, your own bodies, and your children and their bodies, and you stood your ground, and you did the right thing. As best as you knew to do at the time, given the data that you had. And some of you lost your jobs. Some of you went through, I'm sure, horrendous health issues, maybe from the vaccine, maybe not from later. But thank you all for being here and sharing your story. Thank you all for putting up with that. And continue to fight, because as you all know, I mean, we're here now because the fight's not over, right? I mean, and relying on this building, the legislature, to save you from something in the future, that's not going to happen anytime soon. We had a really good bill, a couple of bills actually on the wall that were written. Those didn't go anywhere. I mean, crossover day is passed, and if they haven't gone anywhere yet, that's another day. So what it requires is for each of you to be vigilant where you're at. One of my favorite quotes from one of the buildings in Washington DC says, eternal vigilance is the price of freedom. Right? It requires eternal vigilance, day by day by day, minute by minute, making the right decisions on what you know to be right, because you know a chain link fence doesn't stop the mosquitoes, and that's the comparison they make for a mask and stopping a virus. And that's just stupid. I mean, plenty of you pointed that out. And relatively untested vaccines and brand new technology for untested on so many different classifications of people, pregnant women, children, etc. But no, we're going to require them all to take it. I mean, this makes no sense. Anybody with a couple of brain cells run together could tell that's not a smart idea. So thank you all for standing up in the face of all that and putting up with what you did and being here to represent and share your stories. And so part of that vigilance is getting involved at the local level. So thankful to hear some of you are on your school board, or have been on your school board. Get involved. That is probably the front line right there of getting on your school board. I mean, that's more important than our jobs here. I mean, yeah, we can try to push stuff through, but we're in the minority. The majority carries the day here. If we get some more of us in here to make a difference, it's going to be a real it's tough moving forward. So get on your school boards. Get on your school board. Make a difference. Vote no when that thing comes through. No, we're not going to do that here. We're not going to require kids to mask. We're not going to require kids to be vaccinated from the school. We're not going to discriminate based on your vaccination status. Those are the right things. Those are the right things to do. So again, thank you all. Thank you all for being here. That seemed like it was one of the things that I wanted to talk about. But I'm happy to take some questions. I didn't just have one for you. It's really an open-ended question, but how come when people experience adversity and everybody's had any direct experience with COVID, knows it's a bunch of nonsense, there's so few of you. How come the legislature will not accept logic as the way they form the policy?
Yeah.
My goodness.
You won't.
That applies to things well beyond just. No, I know. Just every time it comes to things like this, there's a tiny few that really seem to know. Yet the vast majority is along with.
We just sat through 2 roll call votes upstairs where the majority voted twice. Once to increase your property taxes and another time against decreasing your property taxes. Back to back. I mean, you all sent us here to control costs. And we just had back-to-back votes, 2 opportunities, one to decrease and one to increase. And all you had to do was vote yes on the decrease and no on the increase. But the majority party got wrong in both of those cases. And you wonder why we struggle with, more technically complicated things like keeping mosquitoes from going through the chain link fence.
Vicky, do you have the votes right now with all the number of legislators that are in place? by the governor. I'm curious, I want to know, are those rhino replacements or are they solid replacements?
They generally replaced with the same party, so if a Republican leaves, they're replaced with a Republican. If a Democrat leaves, they're replaced with a Democrat. That way, they're not taking away the seat from that party. It would be nice if they could replace them with the ones we need, but it's not the way it works.
The replacement candidates get chosen by the party in the local area, where the district is, where the person.
I could have done one of the replacements, but I chose not to because I'm doing something else, but I'm just curious, you know. I'm concerned. When it comes to any kind of vetoes, will the governor's vetoes still be able to be upheld by the president?
Yes, I would say yes. We're gonna keep our 56 number in the House, and we've got a majority in the Senate, so we'll be able.
And those people will upheld that.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you.
I mean, that was, I think, represented pretty well by the 2 votes we just had on the property tax. We had, I think, 56 or more of us.
We did
It's just a couple Democrats.
swing some Democrats over on the second vote. And so it was 68 to 73.
58.
Welcome to the rest.
There were 130, there were 130.
So I can put a few.
Yeah. Yeah, so we did swing over some. And some of the ones that swung over are ones that have already said they're gonna run next year, Democrat side. I think some of them are feeling they got nothing to lose by doing the right thing.
When we dig into the evidence of COVID, we find more than simple negligence of facts. We can find plenty of evidence of criminality. We can find obvious evidence of trespass and violations of the Constitution. My question to you, Mr. North, is as in your position, do you have any angle, leverage, or approach to hold any of the people who did not abide by the tenets of our Constitution strictly, and any approach to call out the criminality that you know of?
Yeah, the only mechanisms that we as legislators are proposing legislation and or resolutions. You can make a House a non-binding resolution if you just want to call attention to something. That has, zero real impact other than waving a big flag and raising some attention. The other mechanism that we have applying some pressure to the right people is working through the governor's office to encourage the proper folks in the proper agencies to do their job. Right. And so those are really the only 3 mechanisms we have. So it's not like I personally can bring charges or anything like that.
Can you bring complaints to the sheriffs or to the AG, and that cite the evidence that we now have?
Yeah, yeah, as a citizen, but certainly as a legislator as well, I carry a little more weight if we, but putting together a letter of citing all the evidence that multiple people sign, and if you want to get some legislators to sign on to that, that's certainly doable.
Because we can say we want an investigation.
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely, sure.
Yes.
Yeah, we're just running up on time.
Yeah.
So if you don't mind, thank you. And
Sure,
thank you, Representative North, for your. Just along those lines, yes, I think we should give them all a standing ovation for sure. But just a suggestion for you guys, would be like the health department. I've really been trying to meet with, and at this point, they're refusing to meet with me. They'll only let me meet with their epidemiologists, but I submitted an information request to them, and I have all their lack of evidence on masks specifically, So maybe there's something we could do to have like a hearing to somehow bring them to the table, so let's just have a conversation. I think would be a good next step. And so thank you, everybody, for being here. I thought it's been so healing for me to work with these gentlemen. And there are several folks on other party lines who I've spoken to off the record who agree with us on masks, who totally understand this. And so what we're doing here tonight is we are changing the culture. We are making this more acceptable and inviting. And so thank you all, and thank you for giving me hope, and thank you for giving all of us hope here tonight. This has been really.
Yeah.